Dear Patriots, before the news starts, please subscribe to our patriotic channel by clicking the subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up to this video. Don't forget to leave your opinion below in the comments section. Share the news on Facebook and Twitter so you friends see it. Thank you.
Trump calls report of looming McMaster exit fake news, aide says. The Trump administration batted down a new report on Thursday that National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster could be on his way out, with President Donald Trump telling a spokesman for the National Security Council that the article was fake news. "I was just with President Trump and H.R. McMaster in the Oval Office," the spokesman, Michael Anton, said in a statement provided to pool reporters. President Trump said that the NBC News story is fake news, and told McMaster that he is doing a great job. Raj Shah, the White House principal deputy press secretary, also cast doubt on reports of McMaster's looming departure, telling pool reporters that the administration often dealt with rumor and innuendo about senior administration officials. "There are no personnel announcements at this time," Shah added. NBC News, citing 5 anonymous sources, reported that the White House was readying itself to replace McMaster as soon as next month. The report says the decision has been orchestrated by Chief of Staff John Kelly and Defense Secretary James Mattis. Speculation surrounding McMaster's status has swirled for months, with senior Trump administration officials telling Politico last week that Kelly and Trump contemplated in November firing the Army general. The relationship between Trump and his national security advisor, who mates say never quite clicked with the president, was publicly tested last month when the commander-in-chief took issue with McMaster, saying that evidence of Russian interference in the 2016 election was incontrovertible. General McMaster forgot to say that the results of the 2016 election were not impacted or changed by the Russians, and that the only collusion was between Russia and Crooked H, the DNC and the Dems, the president tweeted, referring to Hillary Clinton. "Remember the dirty dossier, uranium, speeches, emails and the Podesta company." Trump named McMaster National Security Advisor in February 2017, replacing Michael Flynn, who resigned after misleading Vice President Mike Pence about his communications with a Russian diplomat regarding U.S. sanctions. Trump at the time called McMaster a man of tremendous talent and tremendous experience in announcing the move. Hicks' departure doesn't mean the end of her connection with Trump. Hope Hicks shocked Washington with her resignation, but that doesn't mean she'll be out of touch with President Donald Trump. The president rarely cuts ties with former campaign and White House staffers who have resigned or been fired, and many have found themselves talking to him as much, or more, once they leave his service. This is where President Trump applies his experience as one of the most successful developers in history, said Jason Miller, the senior communications advisor to the Trump campaign, who still remains in touch with the White House. "Just because you might be done teaming up on a certain project doesn't mean you won't be in position to help create a great deal in the future." Trump's kitchen cabinet of former staffers and close advisors is poised to wield more powerful influence on Trump as his White House staff continues to shrink, and as he pivots to his nascent 2020 campaign, which will be run by Brad Parscale, digital media director of the 2016 campaign. In recent weeks, Trump has leaned more heavily on the crew referred to as the originals, people who were on the 2016 campaign, to help craft his message. Former campaign manager Corey Lewandowski was spotted in the Oval Office, while ex-communications director and longtime New York pal Anthony Scaramucci has started talking again regularly with the president, according to a close White House advisor. "It is not people resurfacing," said one administration official. "It's that they never really leave." When the president wanted to preview his State of the Union speech in late January, he opted to do so in the map room of the White House with a bevy of surrogates and former campaign officials, including Lewandowski, Miller, Dave Bossie, Brian Lanza, and Steve Moore, familiar faces from the campaign who stay in close touch with the White House. One attendee said Trump was in a great mood that afternoon, thanking them for their help and girding them for the next battle. "No one ever leaves the greatest show in the world," said one former campaign official. "Sometimes you just miss an episode or two." A White House spokesman did not respond to a request for comment. Hicks, who worked for the Trump Organization before transitioning to Trump's campaign in 2015, is widely seen as a Trump whisperer on par with Trump's daughter Ivanka. He's treated Hicks like family, referring to her as Hopester. Trump has also remained open to staffers he didn't even like when they worked for him. Former Chief of Staff Ryan Priebus, who was abruptly pushed out of his job in July, now talks to the president with some frequency and eats out with key administration officials, including economic advisor Gary Cohn. The one exception may be former strategist Steve Bannon, whose participation in Michael Wolff's book, Fire and Fury, deeply offended the president and White House, with its on-the-record retelling of infighting, factionalism and criticism of the Trump children. In doing so, Bannon broke a few key Trump rules, says the administration official. First, he surprised the president with those comments. Secondly, he challenged Trump publicly, rather than doing so privately. Trump also thought Bannon wasn't good on TV, a huge no-no for a president obsessed with appearances and communication skills, the official added. That does not mean Bannon himself won't resurface at some point. At the end of the day, if Steve Bannon can be useful to Trump, even he could possibly find a way back into his good graces someday, said a Republican strategist close to the White House. The president has always liked to surround himself with a loyal, tight-knit crew, dating back to his days as a real estate developer. His habit of trusting only people he knows well dates back to his childhood, a trait passed down from his father, according to former Trump Organization executive Barbara Rees. She said Trump's father, Fred Trump, taught his son to distrust the people around him. Fred Trump would often say that any employee who doesn't try to steal from his boss was stupid, according to Rees, who said Trump had such misgivings about his employees when he was modernizing the Grand Hyatt in New York in the late 1970s that he often brought his first wife, Ivana Trump, to the construction site to oversee things. "He trusts himself more than anyone else," said Rees, who's now a Trump critic. Andrew Rees contributed to this report. Trump suggests death penalty to stop opioid epidemic. President Donald Trump on Thursday suggested using the death penalty on drug dealers to address the opioid epidemic, equating providing lethal drugs with murder. "We have pushers and drug dealers, they're killing hundreds and hundreds of people," Trump said at a White House summit on opioid abuse. "If you shoot one person, they give you life, they give you the death penalty. These people can kill 2,000, 3,000 people and nothing happens to them." Trump said countries that impose the death penalty on drug dealers have a better record than the United States in combating substance abuse. "Some countries have a very, very tough penalty, the ultimate penalty, and by the way, they have much less of a drug problem than we do," he said. The remarks follow media reports earlier this week that Trump has privately praised countries like Singapore that mandate the death penalty for drug traffickers, arguing a softer approach to substance abuse won't be successful. The remarks are likely to rankle administration critics who have urged the White House to focus on the public health component of the opioid crisis. The president's remarks did not touch on health approaches like providing additional funding for treatment. "It makes us all very nervous that the U.S. could move back to a penal-first approach," said Andrew Kessler, who leads Slingshot Solutions, a consulting firm specializing in behavioral health policy that advocates for substance abuse treatment and prevention. "I have no love for high-level traffickers or cartels, but a very high percentage of people who sell drugs do it to support their own habit." He and others said the government would be better off for treating people for addiction than imprisoning them. "We have done the experiment with extreme mass incarceration to shrink the drug market and it failed," said Mark Kleiman, who leads the Crime and Justice program at New York University's Marin Institute of Urban Management. Between 1980 and today, the number of drug dealers behind bars has gone up by a factor of 30 and the prices of heroin and cocaine have fallen more than 90%. So the problem with putting drug dealers in prison is there is another drug dealer in there to take his place. It's also unclear whether harsh sentences for drug dealers lower the level of drug use in a country. While Singapore has done a pretty good job of reducing drug consumption, countries like the Philippines, Thailand and Malaysia still have huge drug problems, Kleiman said. Former Democratic Representative Patrick Kennedy, a member of the President's White House Commission on Opioids, who was not invited to the summit, said Trump should use the bully pulpit to promote an orchestrated solution across many departments of government. There is a certain easiness about talking tough when in fact we have been talking tough for years and it hasn't gotten us anywhere, Kennedy said. Former Republican Representative Mary Bono, co-founder of the Collaborative for Effective Prescription Opioid Policies, said Trump should have specified who he was referring to when suggesting harsh penalties for drug dealers. If he is really talking about the worst of the worst, he needs to be clear, she said. It gets into a gray area, and it can be a little uncomfortable when you go there. Trump's remarks also deviate from the tone taken by his own Surgeon General Jerome Adams earlier Thursday. At a U.S. Chamber of Commerce event on the opioid crisis, Adams talked about his brother, who is in state prison due to crimes he committed to support his addiction. He emphasized the need for the country to move toward earlier intervention and strengthening its mental health services so that drug-related crimes and prison can be avoided. At the end of the day, if you commit a crime, there are folks out there who are dedicated to and need to address the public safety aspect of it, but the question I ask myself is how many opportunities did we miss earlier on to have had that warm handoff, to have connected him to care so that he didn't continue to go down his addiction pathway, his criminal pathway. That would have saved us money and saved trouble for the people who he honestly did victimize, Adams said. Trump also said his administration will unveil new policies to address the crisis over the next few weeks but did not provide any details, simply stating they would be very, very strong. He expressed support for going after pharmaceutical companies and distributors that supply prescription painkillers for their role in the crisis. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said this week that the Justice Department will file a statement of interest in litigation that includes hundreds of lawsuits by states and localities against opioid manufacturers and distributors. The Justice Department will argue that the federal government has borne substantial costs due to the opioid epidemic and should be reimbursed for health programs and law enforcement efforts to combat the crisis. Cities, counties and states are seeking to recover the costs associated with providing treatment and public safety, by targeting companies that they allege used false, deceptive or unfair marketing practices for prescription opioids. Sessions also said the federal government is studying the possibility of initiating its own opioid litigation. The federal government previously went after many opioid makers in court a decade ago, with companies like Purdue Pharma pleading guilty to misleading regulators, doctors and patients about the drug's risks of addiction and abuse. Trump's remarks came at the end of a summit that highlighted different approaches to addressing drug abuse. HHS Secretary Alex Azar talked about increasing access to treatment programs and focusing on researching non-opioid pain therapies. HUD Secretary Ben Carson discussed how communities can provide support and housing for people suffering from addiction. Some public health experts advocated for a greater focus on prevention efforts. My concern is we're focused on treatment and arresting and not focused on prevention, said Mike Frazier, the executive director for the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials. Advocates and drug policy experts said they are eager to see a follow-through. Regina LaBelle, who served as Chief of Staff at the Office of National Drug Control Policy during the Obama administration, said she thought the White House's efforts were headed in the right direction. I thought they did a great job, she said. Now we have to make sure that we follow it up with action.